the most important aiming skills in tactical shooters has to be micro corrections, and with, I guess, an honorary shout out can go to click timing as well. So micro corrections, let's just define what that is first. Is really just these small flicks, just having a command of like small flicks, like just being able to kind of accurately adjust your mouse in these small spaces. That's really all it is a command of that skill. Now, when we say corrections, it's usually because we also add in this element that, okay, I'm going to flick to the target and I'm off, so I have to correct. Flicked, I'm on. Flicked, I'm off. So I've got to correct after those initial flicks, potentially, so that we can be accurate. And so you always get two chances to actually kill your opponent with those two movements. And if the micro correction is really like very skilled, you'll pretty much always kill the opponent off of the second movement. At least that's the idea. So that's why it is important. But it's also important because so many situations in tactical FPS games, you already have the crosshair like basically very close to where the opponent's going to be. Whether it's because you've got good crosshair placement, or whether it's also just because the enemies don't move very quickly. The speed at which the enemies move in tactical shooters is very slow compared to other games, other FPS games like Overwatch and Quake and Fortnite and stuff. So with all of that said, let's go into some ideas as to like how you can train your flicking technique and your micro technique. So I'm going to use Aim Labs here because it's just way easier to show you things in isolation by doing this. And, getting high quality flicking skill means that we should really start to understand all of the parts of the movement. We should understand how like the friction is working for us or is not working for us, and all of these different dynamics. So we know what focuses we should have when we're training and what we're trying to get out of the training. So one thing I can do is I'm going to take you on a 5-shot here. And this is a static clicking task, which basically means that I just have to, tiny orbs, it's also about precision. So here I can isolate this flicking technique where we have, it's called the bar pill method. And the idea is that you just want two movements where the first movement is very fast and snappy. And then the second movement is just like a micro correction. So I flick over here. Now I just do the micro correction. Flick over here, micro correction. Flick here, micro correction. I actually overshot with the micro correction. And I will say, when you're doing something like this, because you're trying to make sure that you're training your brain to do a few types of movements in sequence, you need to really be intentional with every movement. Make sure that each movement is correct, like to what you want to be. Even if you overflick, that doesn't matter. You just want to have a fast flick, micro correct. Fast flick, micro correct. Micro correct. And you also want to be hit confirming the targets. And you want to have some kind of a pace that's... You don't want your pace to be too crazy, too inconsistent. Because you're also trying to force yourself to a certain speed that feels challenging, but you can still keep the quality of the reps good for what you're trying to do. Because we want these two movements. Now, other things to consider is tension management. So when it comes to tension management is important because it's basically kind of like the amount of energy you can kind of exert on the mouse through your arm. So the tension is like, you're tensing up your muscles, your arm, like whatever, and then you're using that energy to either kind of bear down on the mouse so that you can have a lot of tension on the mouse so you can control it either more when you're tracking, or because that's generally when you're tracking, you have tension on your mouse constantly, which you're kind of using you're using less of or more of depending on how fast the target's moving and how much smoothness you need. And then with flicking, the way that the tension works is it confers to how fast you're able to move essentially. And so if I'm trying to flick to this target really quickly, I have to have a lot more tension than if I'm trying to then make a slight micro adjustment. When I want to make a slight micro adjustment, I don't want this excess of energy in my arm through that tension because it will make me more likely to miss. It's going to be harder to control the micro correction. So what I need is that I get a soft landing. So my landings are softer off of these flicks. So that way we can be more fluid on these micro corrections. And maybe less likely to make mistakes as well on the initial flick, potentially. But you can have this sense of, I'm trying to have this smooth landing. So you're releasing the tension as much as you kind of can as you land on the target you're trying to flick to off of that first flick. So, okay, so there we talked about the tension management and feeling that out. so that the tension should be different when I flick over here to when I flick over here. So I just want to kind of, really get that kind of beaten into you guys a little bit if you're not familiar with this idea. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is we're going to talk about spamming, because you're trying to you're flicking onto a target, but then they move and then you start spamming and these types of things. So this type of task is quite nice for this, because we're going to see that in dynamic clicking tasks, we're going to be able to actually train all of these things, because like the targets are moving. So it's obviously going to be kind of, it feels kind of pressured a little bit to hit them when I flick to one target. I'm already thinking about the next target I want to go to. So I'm starting to spam because I want to just get rid of this target so I can go to the next one. So we need to not do that. That is one massive priority on a task like this. Previously, we talked about focusing on the movements. Fast movement, then take your time with the micro correction, but be intentional with all the movements, trying to make them high quality, because you're trying to habituate that stuff. Now, with this, don't spam click. You're trying to be accurate, because this is about click timing. It's about hit confirming, and it's about being able to predictively aim. So I'm gonna like do my initial flick, and it's like predictive because I'm guessing like which way it's gonna be, the target's gonna be going. I might miss, and now I have to like reorient my mouse somewhere else. And I'm gonna try to flick ahead of the targets, and then that way when they cross into my crosshair, I'll be able to just click, and then they'll die. You're gonna make some misses, but the idea is that you're trying to not spam. And so I'm trying to be very deliberate about this, but I haven't done this in a while, so I'm kind of sucking. But you get the idea. You want to try to flick ahead of the target. You don't really want to be tracking too much. It should look kind of more like that last sequence of kills. Again, you want to be trying to flick ahead, and then as they go through your crosshair, that's when you click. So that's the general idea there. And so if you just practice this task and try to get some scores on it, like try to get good at it, you'll actually find that your click timing will improve, your hit confirm will improve, and you'll be able to be more patient, because all of these scenarios are going to be pushing you more than you'll be pushed likely in the game. Now, there's something else that's worth showing you guys that I think is important, which is these Valorant benchmarks, because you'll actually find that on these, I actually haven't played the intermediate one yet on this. I ran through a bunch of novice stuff, and then I just never got around to doing the intermediate ones, because I'm actually trying to work on my these benchmarks, the Voltaic main benchmarks. But anyways, so you can see that the dominant skills is like all flick tech and micro flicks. Like all of this stuff, basically everything except 4 tasks are micro, but or rather flicking and micro correction dominant. So, you can look at all of these different tasks, and you can look at them and start playing them. You can go through this playlist. You can try to get scores on this. And if you don't want to like put together your own like training, then this is a good way to go. I would say like a good program to follow. Just like do the benchmarks, if nothing else. But so yeah, we talked about some of the ways you can train micro corrections and click timing, and some of the tasks you can go through as we just went through down that playlist. Now, I also want to talk about, friction, because friction's kind of important when it comes to how the mouse actually, performs in a lot of these different movements. I actually had to make a change not too long ago where I went off of a higher friction surface where I don't remember which, I think it was like a GSR. I have a higher friction pad like right here, but this is like a faster Artisan, I think. So it's of course going to be slower than the glass I was previously just using, but yeah. So I was having an issue because I was finding that in tac shooters, I would try to hold angles, and I wouldn't be able to, let's say, comfortably. Let's say I'm holding this angle. I wouldn't be able to comfortably like flick. This feels so muddy and difficult for me to do. It feels so difficult for me to accurately I can't like snap a flick there. Like if someone like appears here, I can flick to them. Like this feels like really like I can go flick, bang. I can like really control that flick. Whereas if they're here, it requires a lot of energy because the mouse is static, and the mouse doesn't weigh very much either. So it's actually really hard to like get the mouse to kind of do what I want it to do. Like this flick feels very, very hard to be consistent. And I kept running into this problem where I felt like I couldn't properly have proper technique or control on this range of movement when I was on a static angle. And again, if we think about the way that friction works off of our pads and how that interacts with, our aiming, if we have like, so there's two types of friction on the pad that you need to be concerned about: the static friction and the dynamic friction. So the dynamic friction is how much energy do you need to essentially move the mouse when, and continue moving the mouse when it's in motion. So it's currently in motion versus when the mouse is in a static position, how much energy is required to move the mouse. Now with a very light mouse, because it's kind of difficult and kind of awkward actually, because the mouse is so light. So if I'm putting a lot of energy in to get it moving off of the high friction surface, it's like really hard to then control it off of that movement, because I like need that tension. So I'm needing to bring in too much tension in a movement that needs less tension. So that's something that's very difficult for me to handle. So I was like, okay, there's two ways I can solve this problem. I either change the pad, which is what I ended up doing, or I change my sensitivity. Because if I change my sensitivity right now, and I mean, obviously I have a really fast sense, but if I change my sensitivity right now, make it way slower. Now when I'm on this angle, you know, I can, it's actually still not ideal for me actually with this particular pad, but I have a lot more control though. Like I actually feel like I can control this and I'd be able to practice and control it. Like it would be manageable. Whereas before I didn't feel like I could control off of static flicks off of a cold angle basically. So so that's something, you know, that was the decision tree I had in front of me. And so I went for the less friction on my pad instead. So that's one way I solved that problem. Oh, another problem that I ran into is when it comes to just aiming in general, that you guys might need to consider as well, depending on what type of aimer you are, is, you know, do I have, like, am I using all the techniques? Is my movement kind of awkward? Like, in what moments is flicking awkward? So I can actually show this to you, I think, most effectively, again, in the aim trainer. And I can also show you kind of how I realized I could solve this problem. And actually, this was a visible problem to me in actually this task here, 5-shot, as well as many others. But I'll use this one again for the example. So I have a faster sense. And so for me, like I've always like used my fingertips. And in fact, I don't know if you can like see even better, like what my fingertips are doing, but you can see that my fingertips are kind of moving quite a lot. Yeah, so you can see my fingertips like move quite a lot, because what I'm doing, as you can probably see on the screen, is I'm going up and down with my fingertips, like up and down like this. And that's how I would do vertical aiming actually, and that's how I would just generally like I would almost always use my fingertips, so like basically everything, because I had such a fast sense, right? So I recognized that I would, when flicking around, I would lose stability for these flicks. And I recognized, like, okay, well, the reason is because my fingertips are like, when I'm like down here or up here or like just on the edges of the range, I start to get really inconsistent. And so I recognize that I need to I can still fingertip aim, but I need to keep it within this kind of a range. And so how can I achieve that? Well, the way to achieve that is to bring in my arm, actually. That's the way to kind of achieve that. By bringing in my arm, I can always have control. But the issue is that when I do that, because it does solve that problem, but when I do that, I need to have arm control now, and I need to have now built in the skill that, okay, my arm is good, but how do I actually now use my arm as well as my fingertips? And this is a way that I had to like retrain my aim, and I'm still kind of in the process of doing it actually. But it's been going kind of well, and there's ways you can kind of actually make this transition. If you're someone that needs to transition your aiming technique like this and add in the arm element, you know, there's many different approaches that you can use. One approach that I actually used was I made my sensitivity sometimes like really slow. That's actually so goddamn slow. I can't do it right now. Make my sensitivity like really slow, and it like forces me to use arm now because my sense is so slow. So I have to like learn how to flick with my arm only. And so that's what I would end up doing. As I spend time like learning to like do all the same techniques, but now with my arm. And you know, it's not going to be like pretty. It's going to be kind of clunky. It's not going to feel good. I haven't done it in a long time actually now. But the thing is that over time you develop that skill. So then now my arm skill is more developed. I then go back into this task and I can go back onto my normal sense that I actually want to get good at. And yeah, I'm in this space now where now I'm able to combine both techniques. And I'm going to show you sort of like a practical example as to like why this has been helpful for me as well. So if I go into Valorant now, and I can go into the range here, you know, it's allowed me to be able to kind of, you know, make these kind of like little fights, and I can like flick over here, and still my fingertips are not kind of like in any way operating out of the range that they're optimal in. I can still kind of use my fingertips kind of as I want to, because my arm is coming in at the right moments. So I'm basically applying more different techniques so that the more optimal technique is used for the thing that it's better at. And I'm not using my fingertips for something that they're not good at, for example. Okay, so these are two problems that I solved. So I solved one issue so instead of actually changing my sends, I ended up adding my arm in, learning how to use my arm, and then that helped me be more consistent with my fingertip aiming, as well as like solving the other problem by lowering the friction of my surface. So with that said, you know, I think if you guys are focusing on improving your flicking, you know, make sure you try to think about all of these different things and how they either makes the flicking easier or harder for yourself. Do you need more friction or less friction for your micro corrections? Do you like, how does your sends actually feel? Do you actually like the sends you play on? If so, what area are you struggling with? If your micro corrections aren't really, you know, doing a great job for you, let's say I move my sends down again. If your micro corrections like aren't, you know, helping you out very much, like do you need to focus on wrist or fingertip aiming? Depending on your sends, how slow your sends is, you know, something that Mini would say is that he would find that the fingertip development is actually really important for a lot of players that use slow sends, because like I had an underdeveloped arm technique. Players with slower sends will tend to have an underdeveloped fingertip technique. So you can kind of do the opposite thing and make the sends like really fast and sort of isolate your fingertips and see what you can do with your fingertips. So for example, if I go to, again, I can show you on a previous task we just played, angle shot. I go into angle shot and I change my sends so that it is really fast. 15 cm. Let's do 15 cm. Okay, so now I am like forced to use my fingertips now. So I have to use my fingertips. I have to like get this sensitivity of like my brain. It has to figure out how to like use the fingertips, how to control the fingertips. And although, you know, you'll never play on this sends, doing drills like this, it does make it like you get more out of your fingertips. So you are like forced to increase the skill of using the fingertips for stuff. And I've done this quite a few times, and I've gotten some kind of actually pretty good scores doing it, surprisingly. But the point is that, you know, you're able to kind of isolate the fingertips a little bit there. It just really depends on what you think you are struggling with these skills. Now, what you can do is you can also go into you know, like I like to use all of the features, all of the things that we can possibly use to help us. So you can either go on YouTube, look at, you know, good aimers. You can look at good aim trainer players. You know, in this in particular, for example, I think I have to like go through the actual task, but you can see replays of players that are like really good or around your level, and you can kind of see like what are they doing, like where does their movement look good. I definitely recommend all of Matty's videos. In particular, I think the Snowy video and the Skooky video are like the two like money videos in terms of helping you. The Skooky video is geared towards tracking, but there's a lot of principles in that video that are very easily applied to flicking in terms of how you approach the training. Because what you do is you see Skooky actually going through, you'll see him going through like isolation for just arm. Then he'll do isolation for just wrist technique. And then he'll do like isolation, or rather, sorry, like tasks that will focus on both of those techniques at once. And so you can kind of see like how he actually tries to train for like more complex skills, basically how he breaks them down. And I think that's very valuable. And then equally, the Snowy video is really good because it helps you to understand how to like ways you can improve in your flicking technique that I think are, you know, harder for me to explain. So shout outs to Matty for that one. Okay, so I think we've gone over quite a few bits and bobs here. Man, this sensor's really fast, but it's kind of fun though. We've gone over quite a few different bits and bobs. We've talked about how, friction works, like where the tension should be. We've talked about, different examples in game. And, if you go into your death matches and so on, I really advise this approach where because you get this feeling, you get a feeling of like what it's like to use and control this sense. You get a feeling of what it's like to do that Bardos method where you're, to do the flick, the microcorrect, the hit confirm. You get the feeling of, and that tension. You've got to practice that tension. It's like I explain oftentimes that it's like, throwing a punch where you don't want much power, as you're actually, throwing the punch. You want to have minimal tension in your arm because you're able to get the arm out more quickly that way. And then you push in the tension all the way when you make the strike actually happen. At that last moment, that's when all the tension comes into the punch, all the power comes into the punch, right at that moment when you're making contact. Because then after that moment, your arm has to like loosen up again because you've got to maneuver it. And it's a very similar idea when it comes to these flicking techniques. Of you have to figure out like what feels good for you. Because I have to say, you can make lots of different things work, but just like play around with it. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Cheers.